Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts, Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Office 365 focused IT security professionals. Each episode, we talk about a specific topic in the space. This week, it's episode 2 of season 3. We're going to have a chat around Azure Virtual Desktop, an application and desktop virtualization solution that can help provide desktop and applications running on Azure. Hey, Alan, how are you doing?
Hey Sam, I'm not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you. It's our second week back of season 3 of podcasting in the new year. Um, I felt that the episode before definitely felt a bit strange because we had a month long gap right before, but it does feel good to be recording again and actually having something that we need to do every week, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. It feels good to be back.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
did,
Yeah.
definitely did miss it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, but I think it's also good because, in and around everything else, I think it is good to sometimes have a break. But anyway, so Azure Virtual Desktop, Alan. Um what are we talking about with Azure Virtual Desktop this week?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about how we, a high level, yeah, how it works, how you manage it, because I expect a few people on the listening in might have managed their remote desktop service service from other products, things like that. How we test it, what's the difference between AVD, Azure Virtual Desktop, and Windows 365. A quick sort of look at it, and how can we deploy it? What's the different methods, and
Okay,
that, and how
cool.
much it
Well,
costs, of course.
yeah, let's jump in then. And so, Alan, can you give us a high level overview of what Azure Virtual Desktop is?
Yeah, sure. So Azure Virtual Desktop is kind of what it sounds like. It's virtual desktops in Azure. It was at one point called Windows Virtual Desktop, but then they rebranded it. But in essence, it's providing access to a host pool, a session host, or a dedicated machine that a user or users can access from anywhere. Well, from anywhere in effect. It's kind of like uh, the remote desktop or session hosting has been around for quite some time. It's been thin terminals jumping onto remote sessions, depending on the type of business that need it and things like that. But this is slightly different in the sense that it's not Windows Server. You can use Windows Server, but this is Windows 10, Windows 11 multi-session. So that's a quite a big change, sort of in the world. You could do virtual desktops, VDIs with other providers, personal devices, but being able to do multi sessions on a Windows 10, Windows 11 is it's quite a big thing because there's a lot of applications out there that do checks against the operating system to be installed, and they're like Windows Server, nah, I'm not being installed, and then you get like that, you have to then work around it. So it does make some of the management sort of easier. And some of the scenarios of using Azure Virtual Desktop, if no one's sort of been in that world, because there are other products like Citrix is a big big key one out there, and there's a few others out there. VMware do one as well. Um, but one of the main things is that if you've got remote workers, they can use their personal devices to access, and with security in between, can then access a full fledged desktop which you manage. So you're able to secure that environment. Other scenarios are secure workstations. So maybe there's they have their own corporate devices, and maybe there's some systems that have to be secured in a different way. You potentially could use it for that as another jump box to then get to those systems. And then I guess the last sort of one I can think of right now is talking around business continuity and disaster recovery. Being able to spin up multiple machines for users if there's an outage in an office, if you've just got desktops kind of thing where they can go home and use them, or if you've got to jump to another site, maybe it might be really quick just to spin all that up. So yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's a
no, that does
quick high
seem.
level.
Yeah, it seems like to me it seems like a modern cloud first rethinking of more traditional, remote service, solutions that may be out there, already, right? It's obviously, so from that perspective, it does sound like they are approaching it from a different, perspective, which does give us um some maybe new ways to configure things, but also on the other side of it, some simplicities, like, not having to worry about any of the underlying infrastructure because it's in, Azure, from the name, obviously. And then, you've got things like, you say that Windows 10, Windows 11, multi-session hosts instead of, actually using, server operating systems instead. So yeah, no, it sounds, it sounds really good.
And I would kind of say as well that it's been out for about, I think it's about 2 years now, maybe three. Um, but it's definitely being developed and coming along. It's come a long way since then, and it's starting to become very competitive compared, to the other RDS services that have been out there for a long time. Like, Citrix has been out there for a long time. They've been working. They've been out for years. They've got it all nailed. All the management and everything. You can't really fault their solution. Just it can be quite expensive, but that it make their lives your lives easier as well. So it's yeah, but yeah, it's definitely becoming a lot easier to use and being compared, comparable to them.
Yeah, well, I think I think, it's great having those larger solutions, but like you say, they sometimes are out of reach for certain organizations, and also the level of control that you can have maybe in those types of systems, and like you say, you can't fault the solutions that they're providing, right? Many years of experience and product development to get to where they are now. But to have everything in one cohesive ecosystem can really be powerful, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Alan, could you just give us a sort of a high level a primer on, how does it work, how does it function?
Yeah, sure. So as it sounds, it all sits on Azure, and the gateways and web access is all managed by Microsoft. So it is, SaaS solution on Azure. You in effect, spin up these services and then they're available to you. Um, you then create host pools, and these are pools of machines that then users can jump onto, and you can put application desktops onto them. Um, there are two types of pools. You can have personal pools, which in effect, virtual desktops or VDIs. So they are, assigned to individual users. So they have a one to one ratio. And then you have the pooled hosts, and they are the ones where you can say there's 10 users on, one machine kind of thing, to reduce that sort of cost depending on their workload and things like that. Um, there are clients that are on a majority of the operating systems. So I think it is, it's Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android, and obviously the web. So there's an HTML5.8 client as well. Nothing for Linux at the moment, but you could use the web client. And then sort of the other parts to it is that there are some media redirection. So we see this in other, remote desktop solutions, but this is, around Teams. So redirecting the Teams voice and video to the local device so that you don't, consume resources on the remote session, but also to improve that sort of capability there. And kind of the good thing about the session host piece is that it is all outbound. You don't have to worry about trying to open up ports on the firewalls in Azure or expose them to the internet. It is all outbound to the service, to the Azure AVD service. So then they, in effect, they create an outbound connection, but then the session can then come in. So it's very easy from a security perspective to sort of manage.
Yeah, well, that sounds, really well integrated, right? And I suppose I suppose cat out of the box, I suppose at this point is, you and I have both been working with AVD quite recently, and we have seen that I don't know the correct word to use, the connectedness, into Azure, right? The integration, to the Azure platform, right? Is sort of second to none. So if you are in Azure and that's what the world that you sort of live in, then AVD should feel pretty at home to you, in that ecosystem.
Yeah, well, exactly like you said. Even though it's in the cloud, you can, because in effect the host machines are just Azure virtual machines, and they're connected to a VNet. If that VNet has connectivity to your on premise, then you can access those applications down on premise, or if they're running any application Azure can run from there. Um, there are images for the multi-session that is just sort of plain, Windows 10 and 11. But you've also got ones with built-in Office 365, things like that. So it's it can be productivity as well as just joining, um, going off and just connecting to remote sessions. But that's probably another thing that I've probably missed out is that you can actually do something called remote app, and that is just showing an application rather than a user seeing the full desktop, which in some cases and maybe most cases is what you need. There may be some scenarios where you may have remote access and you just want to access we'll say the HR system. I know we always use that, but say the HR system, from that only that IP range maybe, you can just allow that application or web browser to open on that user's device, and it just looks like a normal app. They can move it to different pages and everything, but it's remote, so you can secure that data as well that way.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, isn't it? And at the end of the day, and that user experience is what's really going to that user experience is what the users of the system are going to be interacting with every day, right? So how well polished and integrated, and how many systems are supported for those client applications is really what's going to drive adoption and and praise and good feedback from you know I'll say it, non-technical users that have to actually use these systems on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've had it as well that when we've been testing the remote app side of things, it's very difficult to understand actually that it's a remote app when you've got all your applications open. When we've been testing it, that are remote desktop app, so you can access stuff in Azure via it. It's you wouldn't know that it wasn't local.
No, even without sort of GPU accelerated instances, right? It is, especially if you've got, relatively I'll call it simplistic apps that you're using, you literally wouldn't know that they're not, running locally. So it is really powerful, definitely. So thanks for giving us that overview of how it sort of works. But can we talk about management? Because I assume our listeners are more likely to be ones managing this day to day.
Yes, so management is it can be a bit of a beast, but running into virtual desktop solutions is generally can be difficult to manage. But I'll kind of go through some of the scenarios and things like that. So yeah, managing Azure Virtual Desktop as a service is probably generally quite easy because it's mostly managed by Microsoft. It's more around managing the hosts and them being available and patching them and things like that. That is probably the most difficult part, and making sure applications are on there. So that is a general sort of difficulty for any remote desktop solution. Doesn't matter who you're doing it with. You either got to build custom images to then be deployed, let them run for a bit, and then you refresh that image every so often. That's one scenario. Depending on where it's sat and things like that, it depends on how easy that may be. Um, the kind of part around Azure Virtual Desktop is that it is in Azure. It is Windows 10 and Windows 11. So that means that you can use Intune. So deploying applications, making sure they're up to date, make sure policies on there. You could do some of that with group policy if you've got them joined to the domain, and I'll talk about that in a minute, just quickly as well. But if everything's in Intune and you're already using Intune for your Windows 10 and 11, endpoints anyway, it's kind of almost like transferring it over with those extra settings, for remote desktop sessions, like disconnecting your session after X time and logging you off and things like that. That kind of thing for multi-session at least. So you've got that sort of it for managing applications and things like that. Microsoft bought FS Logics, which was a profile management solution. They've kept the name for now, but in effect, that can manage the user's profiles, and it can roam between different session hosts or VDIs, etc. So that's really good, and that's relatively simple to set up. It means that their profile isn't stored then on the virtual machine or the session host, which means you have to worry about managing disk space. It's all done in the Azure files or NetApp files. The other bit is that you can attach MSIX files or VDIs or VHDs, I should say. So if you've got custom applications that need a lot of configuration, you can attach that to the host pool, and then it will attach it and the application to the the hosts. So that means that in effect it's virtualizing or adding that application into the OS without you have to worry about it. So again, you don't have to worry about disk space and keeping up to date in one, on all the hosts. You can do it in one place. So that's really good. Just going back briefly to how you join these devices, because in Azure you can Azure AD join them. It can make the authentication process and the sort of that domain joining piece really easy. You don't have to worry about having a domain controller up in Azure or having that VPN in. You can just be, Azure AD joined and then managed with Intune. That's relatively easy to do. And that's what we're using, Sam, isn't it? And it's really simple. You can join it to the domain, and then you can use group policy to manage it. That's absolutely fine. But when there's scenarios that you don't need to do that, I think it's worth not doing.
Yeah, and as you just briefly mentioned, that how simple it is quite incredible, really, isn't it? From a especially a deployment point of view, right? It's very simplistic, and I wouldn't even say, yeah, I completely agree that the configuration of that is, yeah, that's definitely simple when you're going for that type of approach.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. So thanks for talking about the management of it. It seems like you know, because we're in Azure, we're going to have to manage it in a modern way anyway. We're just going to be naturally teased into thinking about management with these cloud-based management solutions, right? And like you say, it fits naturally because it's all part of Azure, so that makes a lot of sense. Could you just talk to us around the deployment and testing and validation process that you've been through?
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of relatively easy to get like an initial test up, especially if you're using Intune and Azure AD joined. It building the workspace, going through the portal, and going through the blades and things like that. It's relatively easy to get something up and running quite quickly. I think we probably did it in sort of once, doing some, especially if you've never seen it before, it probably take you about half an hour to get a machine up and running, I think, which I think is relatively easy. I mean, bear in mind it's not going to have all your configuration effort. This is be able to, for you to be able to remote desktop a machine in Azure. Which
You're
that's
talking
Windows
about
10.
using the portal, yeah? Just clicking
Yeah,
through and getting to your first,
yeah,
desktop, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
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 Just
Half an
doing
hour. Yeah.
just getting the connectivity part done. None of the management, none of the extra bits that we know, all the other bits you got to do to make sure reduce
Yeah.
costs and things like that.
Yeah, in half an hour, you could have a multi-session host up and running and be able to invite a couple of people into it, right? Easy peasy, right? Without any problem whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. But like I said, it's that was just talking about the connectivity, getting you access to it uh, without thinking about access to your on premise or going through the corporate firewall, things like that. Yes, it's relatively simple. Doing a full build and design, I wouldn't say it takes too much, but there is a lot to think about. What different types of pools you want to do. Do you want to do VDI? Do you want to do pools? What size do they need to be? Um, Talking about your disaster recovery plan for it, um, and of course your Intune configuration and your image. That stuff takes a long time because if you're not already using remote desktop services and you haven't got an idea of that base image, then you've got there may be some things you've got to do to get everything working, your applications working, because it'll be not necessarily a minefield, but it's understanding whether they're capable of working with multi sessions and things like that. Most applications do, but you always find the ones that are tricky. So, but yeah, I think I think it. I don't think it takes huge amounts of time. Um, it will be about, like I said, it's always about the actual hosts rather than the host pools and the stuff that Azure is managing.
Yeah, in my experience, from my side, if you if you think that my sort of involvement in AVD is more around infrastructure, managing that infrastructure, um, I would say it was all around, if you have multi-session hosts, how many sessions do you have per host? What hosts are, um, what virtual machine sizes are you using? Going through that, to understand what types of applications your users are running. Because some applications aren't going to require as much, you know, um, CPU and memory pressure as maybe say full desktops and people using them like laptops, and there's many different scenarios. So I think it's to me every single AVD deployment is going to be unique in certain areas and design characteristics. I think the core, like you say, AVD itself as a service, there's very few things to configure. I don't know if that's the right thing to say, but there's not, there's three, four, maybe 3 or 4 areas. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, are different areas that you need to configure, and that can all be done in portals. It comes to me, it comes down to the infrastructure that you're running on, how you manage that infrastructure. And then the big black box that I don't particularly get involved in is the configuration, so the specialist, Intune configuration, FS Logics, and all of that, getting it production ready. Um, it, I didn't feel like it was complex. It just took iterations of testing, checking, so it just took time to do that, and to me, having what was really important was having a set of users that were willing to give it a try, not just us as the people configuring it, right? Like real people, like non-technical, well, a lot of the people we work with are still technical, but like I'll use it, the non-AVD technical, people, because their feedback is sometimes way more important than anything else, right? They find so many more use cases and edge cases that you could ever find by yourself. So yeah, recruit yourself a good set of willing victims to come and test your configuration, because it will be wrong. You will have to make changes. So yeah, definitely.
It's quite interesting you say about the our users, well, not our users in general that we work with, but some of our team are using AVD, and you would think that they'd be using it on Windows devices, but actually, one of our colleagues is using it on an iPad Pro. I think it's an iPad Pro. It's the more powerful one to use as a device for going out and about with, which is
Yeah.
quite interesting scenario. Um,
Well, it's
But
it's a
yeah,
way for people to it's a way for people to like, BYOD, but without all the hassle of
imagine your
BYOD.
device. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Because you're just, it's a video. Well, it's not just a video stream, but it's like, a stream of a desktop coming down, or all your apps being streamed to you as well. So from that perspective, it's really, yeah, really really powerful.
yeah, and I guess we haven't really talked about the securing it either, have we? Really? Um, because because if you're using Azure AD, which is kind of a good thing in some scenarios, is that you can do conditional access on it. So you can specify one to see whether you have access to any AVDs environments. You can do MFA there, but also when you go to log onto the device, you can say you require MFA. So if it's an unmanaged device, you can say, right, you need MFA. If you're on a managed device, you don't. Um, and you can specify that whether certain host pools you can't access on anything but a managed device as well. So if they're sensitive, then you can restrict that access as well. So it's definitely really easy to kind of do some of that stuff.
Yeah, it has been thought about, right? That all the common, I would say, the common scenarios that we've needed, in terms of adding, AVD specific restrictions in, that are more niche than what would go into, say, your Intune configuration, right? Actually
Yeah,
in AVD itself, there's tons of configuration there, and I would say everything that we've ever needed has been covered, hasn't it? Right. And it's from a portal perspective, it's like check boxes of I don't want our users to be able to do that, right? It's super simple. So yeah, no, it is security, as you can imagine, is got, it's prime, it's front and center, definitely. Okay, so Alan, is there anything else in that area that you wanted to cover, or you think you've I know everything on the podcast has to be pretty whistle stop anyway. If not, I'm happy for us to move on to the next section.
the the only thing I might talk about is going back to sort of management is um, scale sets and logic apps. Um, so a scale set is in effect a profile, a configuration that allows you to specify how much of a host pool you have. So say you had 10 session hosts that could say each session host could have 10. So you got a capacity of 100. You don't, if you to reduce costs, you don't want to turn all 10 on every day because that'd be crazy. Um, so session scale sets in effect allow you to specify when virtual machines start up and how many you have at the start, and then it will then say when the pool gets X full, then it will spin up the next one. It'll turn it on. So this isn't deploying new session hosts. This is just turning them on out of the pool, and that's really really powerful. The kind of downside to the scale set that we've seen, and it's probably in our scenario that in our scenario, session hosts are kind of for the occasional user that needs it, and business continuity or disaster recovery if someone's device dies and things like that. So it's not going to be used day in day out. So we don't really want to have a virtual machine running 24/7 because it's kind of a waste of not a waste of money, but a cost that we don't really need to be there. So the only downside to scale set is that you kind of overnight, unless you're specifying to your users that after X time there is not going to be any session hosts, you have to leave one up all the time. That's the kind of thing we see in Sam on it that from our scenario we may want someone to log on to one at any point of any point in the day. It could be at night, but in a scale set scenario, and we told it to for none to be available, we wouldn't be able to do that. That's right, isn't it, Sam? From what
Yeah,
we've
yeah,
seen.
yeah. For us, when we're talking about business continuity, somebody's laptop, you know goes kaput, and they happen to have a personal device that they can use and they're willing to use, as an intermediary, then we want people to be able to connect into our ABD hosts. But if they have to wait 2-3 minutes for the host to boot, let's say, first thing in the morning, the first user that potentially logs into it, they have to wait 2-3 minutes, then we don't really see that as a problem, because once the host is up and those types of things. So yeah, so we did play around with, are they called scaling plans, aren't they? Are they called scaling plans or scale sets? I
Scaling
can't
plans,
remember.
yeah. Sorry, not
Scaling
scale
plans,
sets.
yeah. I think it's scaling plans. Um, and scaling plans are great when you've got, you know, um, maybe when you're at a bigger scale,
Yeah.
when you've got, maybe 4, 6, 8 hosts, and you've got, let's say your organization, all you did was VDI, all you did was Azure Virtual Desktop. You had everything was thin and everything was in, Azure. Then that would make way more sense, because scaling down to one would make total sense, because like those users can't use their machines until they can get in, right? So it makes sense to fill them up as you go. So if you have maximum of 4 users, once you get to your third user, you fire up a new host, and and so on and so forth. So scaling plans didn't work in our scenario, but the fact they exist, and and Microsoft are happy with you spinning down your instances when you're not using them, which isn't probably in Microsoft's best interest to give you that ability like right out of the box, which is I would say a nice move from them. But yeah, definitely powerful, but unfortunately not quite what we need in our scenario.
Yeah, and one thing that Microsoft provided with the solution, as you said, Sam, we didn't really talk about it, is that you've got Connect on Start on Connect, sorry. So that when you using the remote desktop client and you connect, it then says, "Oh, waiting for machine. Oh, it needs to be powered on, powering on machine." So if it is a rarity that you use it, you can have them powered off all the time until you need it. And that's kind of the scenario we went for, because of the rarity of us using it, is that we decided to build a logic app to monitor the hosts, and then when there was no sessions on them, we'd then shut them down. And then if someone needed it back again, then they just power back on. So that's worked for us really well, because of the way we're using it. Like you said, Sam, if there is you've got 10 users that use it constantly every day, then scale plans makes perfect sense. It's just
Well,
in our
yeah.
scenario, it is on demand for us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and it also depends what your balance of user experiences versus money, budgets, and and cost savings is, right.
Yeah,
Because some organizations will be like, no, I want 2 running continuously, or whatever number it needs to be. Whereas we're also happy with giving those resources back when we're not needing them, and then when we do need them, we request them again. So that there are some downsides to our scenario, because there might not be any availability of the SKU that we're using, in the
yeah, it's
region
true.
that we are, and that we are. There are a few intentional design decisions that we've made with that, and some risk we've taken on. Um, but everybody loves a bargain, so that's what it comes down to. And Microsoft would say, what is it for this year? Do more with less, I think, is the catch line
Yep.
for this year. So we're just taking that, through spirit,
We
right? That's We're
we
taking
didn't
it
we
to the
didn't
nth
go
degree.
we didn't go as far as spot instances though, did we?
No, we didn't. We did investigate many different things, and yeah, it's like, oh, should we run just a bunch of spots? Because we could have, I don't know, what was it, 3 spots per. I can't remember what the exact ratio was, but it was, or at least twice the amount of spots. So yeah, we didn't go with that in the end. We didn't quite feel that a production shift system should be running on spot instances, but alas, we didn't get that one through. Okay. So Alan, you mentioned earlier on around Windows 365. Could you tell us how? Because Windows 365, from what I know, is a very similar offering from Microsoft. So could you just give us, how they sort of sit side by side?
Yeah, sure. And I'll also talk about DevBox, I think it is. Azure DevBox. Um, yeah, so Windows 365 is a fully SaaS solution that, in effect, is based on subscription. So it's another subscription SKU that you can buy through the portals. And in effect, you buy a virtual machine or a virtual desktop, a VDI, at a certain configuration. Two CPUs, 4 gig of RAM, etc., or 8 gig of RAM, etc., and disk space. So this is really sort of those users that are going to be using virtual desktops day in day out, personal to them. It might be that this works out better from a cost perspective because all you have to do is they can be Azure AD joined again. They can connect to a VNet. You can configure some VNet stuff in the background, um, and they can talk to Intune, so you configure them. And really, all it is a separate portal, and they can go in there and go start my machine up, shut it down, rebuild it, um, and a few other various things. But yeah, it's mainly based on subscriptions. So, like I said, you can buy per monthly this, in effect, virtual machine. I suppose it's similar to a reservation in Azure, but you don't get to choose what the CPU is and things like that, or the SKU. In effect, you do. I suppose in some sense you do, but it's mainly a subset of configuration. Um, the difference to Azure Virtual Desktop is that AVD is consumption based, so it's all based on your subscription, what you use. So that's the reason why shutting it down is of benefit to reduce costs. Um, if I talk about I think it's called Azure DevBox. I think it's in preview. In effect, this is a sub system or sub view of Windows 365. That it's not. It's a full sort of SaaS solution that you can spin up multiple boxes per user that allows them to, in effect, do development potentially, and they can be put into different projects and things like that. And you can specify the SKU that a user can request. This is slightly different than AVD because, in effect, everything is managed. You just specify the SKUs and things like that from a configuration perspective, and they can just go on and jump onto it and do what they need to do. So yeah,
Yeah, so because I think DevBox is more around having consistent development environments, that you can spin up, right, that are saved for each one of like your because the configuration for a developer, it can be like really insane, for the different things that they've got to have installed and configured, and that they can fire them back up. But it's all the same types of thing because dependent on different types of users, you might have different solutions, right?
yeah,
Because you might want your developers to have really thin laptops, really portable and light laptops, so that they can roam around. But then them being able to have these environments that they can replicate over and over again that are consistent, for their development needs. So yeah, there's many different ways to you know to
yeah.
approach it.
I think with the dev box as well, it's around, like you said, keeping the projects separate because I'm guessing there can be conflicts with software installs and things like that.
Definitely, yeah, yeah.
Not knowing too much about that, but yeah, can see it. I can see it.
Yeah, well, you want your really ideally you want your development machine to be as close to your staging environment as you possibly can in terms of configuration. And like you say, if you've got multiple applications in, your let's say you're a SaaS company, you build like you got like 3 or 4 different SaaS applications potentially. Um, then you might want different configurations, and just being able to remote into those different environments. So yeah, definitely. So can we talk about how we could potentially automate the deployment of Azure Virtual Desktop?
Of course, we can. So you can do it via the portal, but what we've seen is that there can be multiple locations to do configuration, and if you were testing and rebuilding or having to rebuild it multiple times, it would be quite easy to miss some configuration, especially from an infrastructure perspective. If you're rebuilding the VNets and all the routes and things like that you may need to do. So there is a PowerShell module that you can use to potentially write a PowerShell script to build it. You can of course use an ARM template to build most of it, if not all of it. But what seems to be our favorite, becoming my favorite now, is you can terraform it, which we've had some fun with that, Sam, haven't we? There's been quite a lot of it's probably taken a little while to get it how we want it to be able to spin up stuff quite quickly, hasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, because there's multiple sides to it. You know, you've got the actual infrastructure, the terraforming the infrastructure, then you've got terraforming the network. Well, that's kind of part of infrastructure, but I'm sort of meant compute resource more than anything. You've got compute resources, you've got your networking, um, then you've got Azure Virtual Desktop itself, so the service and configuring it and keeping that consistent. And then you've also got I'll call it like the Intune side of things and FS Logics to potentially deal with. So I'm not sure. I can't remember the exact number. I want to say 7 when we deploy another session host. I think it's around 70 resources we create per session host. I think in a production configuration. So you know that's hosts, Azure Virtual Desktop, that's FS Logics, that's um, in AAD join, Intune. Is
Subnet.
there anything? Networking, yes. Firewall, all that sort of stuff. Routing. So yeah. So if you've the thing I would say is if you've got more than a couple of hosts, you might want to look at some sort of automated deployment solution for that. Our flavor of that is Terraform, and as Alan's mentioned, we know there's other ways of doing that as well. But attempting to automate the deployment of that can be very advantageous, especially as Alan said, when you want to test your business continuity and you're in testing different versions and configurations over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got our configuration. We'll talk about one of the configurations because we've got two. I think we can spin it all up within. Everything can be deployed within about 10 minutes, can't it? And that's with 4 hosts. I think 3 or 4 hosts being deployed. There's still some time for those hosts to be ready from a configuration perspective, from a operating system, because Intune's got to do its bits and things like that. But I think within 10 minutes we could spin up something ready, couldn't we? In other scenarios we've got, I think it's even sort of ready at that point. I think, isn't it? Is it 10 or is it?
Yeah, and we haven't really even optimized that because there's a lot of stuff we do synchronously that we could probably do side by side. But the main slowest parts are the hosts themselves and the virtual machine extensions because they take a lot of time to validate and to call back. But yeah, I would say about 10 minutes. I would say we can do a full rebuild of two or three hosts definitely in 10 minutes quite easily.
Yeah, and I think doing it through the portal, you look at it sort of 20, 30, 40 minutes, I think, because of all the things you got to have on your checklist.
Yeah, but that's my biggest that's my biggest benefit of going through because creating a Terraform configuration isn't free. It takes time. You've got to make an investment there. um but on the other side, if you did have to have a checklist that you had to go through and documentation you still need documentation for Terraform, but the checklist that you would need would be very, very, very long. And I personally think the chance of mistake is a lot higher, in that scenario. Not pasting in the correct Azure Virtual Desktop. What are the configuration settings called? I can't remember what they're called. You get a big long string, don't you? Additional
The session host
configuration,
configuration, the
session host
RDP
configuration.
configuration, yeah.
Yeah, the RDP configuration. If you did it manually with the checkboxes, it could be prone to error there. So, We're just lazy, aren't we, Alan? It's as simple as that. We don't want to have to do that sort of stuff. So yeah, we go out of our way to over-engineer Terraform, and but in this scenario, it's actually justified. So it is pretty good. Okay, Alan. What are we looking at in terms of costs for Azure Virtual Desktop?
Okay, so if you've got a Microsoft 365 E3 license or a Windows, in effect, if you've got Windows Enterprise um, as part of your subscriptions or your licensing, you're able to use the Azure Virtual Desktop solution. It's included. I was going to say free, but it doesn't really count because you have to have one of those licenses to have it. So it's included. So you have the rights to use Windows 10 and Windows 11 multi-session or VDI. If you do want to go to Windows Server as a host, then you have to have your RDS cows and things like that still. So it's definitely. I mean, I can't really see any reason why you would go server now. Really, I might be wrong. There might be some scenarios, but I don't see the point personally.
Not unless you had a no, no, because
Because even if
not
you
unless you
jump to
had
another
some.
box, jump to a server, it didn't matter, would it?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, no, I can't think of one. There will be obviously niche
Yeah.
cases out there, but yeah, I can't think of one off the top of my head.
So that's included. So that means that the management fabric, the AVD fabric there is included in your your current licensing. The only caveat to that is if you've got, I still need to look at this because I found it the other day that if you've got contractors or non-company employees or accounts, so people who don't work for you, um, you then they have to then pay between £5 to £10 per user per month to use that fabric. And the £5 is around just using remote app. So if you're just giving them access to an application without the full desktop, then it's only I think it's £4.80. I just ran it up to £5 because I expect the prices will change at some point. But if you want to give them full desktop, then they can use the remote app and the full desktop, and it's £10 per user per month of them actually using it. So it's not it's in again, it's a sort of a consumption based. So if you've got a third party that has a local account in Azure AD, then needs to remote onto one of these to then jump in effect to the application they manage maybe, or to use your service, because it could be you provide a service to a customer. When they use it, they then pay for that month in effect. So I think that's fairly fair sort of
Yeah,
thing, I think.
it keeps it simple. When they do the remote app for £4.80, call it £5.
Yeah.
Is that for just a single app? Could you? Where does the delineation
Good.
of?
I think it's just using remote app service because I
Okay, right,
think
right.
you can do. I think because you're not using a full desktop, you don't need to do some of the other technology.
Yeah,
I don't know how they or why they do that difference, but I guess it's a different experience. If you're giving someone full desktop, they can do everything, can't they?
yeah, definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
remote
exactly.
app may
It's a
be
lot more powerful,
limited.
isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
So yeah, and then so that's kind of the management piece, and then the only other consumption or the consumption is the actual virtual machine. So that is dependent on how big you want them, how many you have. So you can reduce that cost by using reservations if they're going to be on 24/7, or you have solutions like the Scale Plan or Logic Apps or Azure Automation to help you manage that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So yeah, that's generally the costing. It doesn't seem too complicated. The most complicated part is probably working out what host you want and
Yeah,
how much power you need and how much you need. We've had
yeah,
that. We've been trying burstables and things like that. They don't sometimes
yeah.
don't
No,
work out great.
yeah, no. It's definitely important to go through that learning process for sure. Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, Alan. Anything else you want to cover on Azure Virtual Desktop?
Uh, I would I would say if you've not tried it out and you think there's a scenario there, I'd definitely go and try it out because, like I said, it only takes 10 minutes to see it working. You can even do the remote app quite easily, and just testing it out and seeing what the experience is and seeing whether it would fit within your organization. I think because
Yeah, well,
I think
if you're up for managing that, and I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm saying that if you're up for replacing your current solution with something that you have control of and you can configure and you can understand, um, but also allow Microsoft um, the headache of actually hosting the service, because it it is sort of DIY and build it, but it is kind of um, like it's SaaS-ish, isn't it? Because you know,
I guess it's
because
PaaS,
if
isn't it?
it is PaaS, but
Sort
yeah,
of.
I would say so. It's just a bit, it's a bit strange because it's like this, because in the scenario of you know, uh, bringing the compute resources from Azure, you obviously don't have to manage those. Um, you do from a configuration perspective, but then you've got things like Intune that can help you rapidly, and Intune is relatively, I'm not going to, relatively simplistic to set up. It is cloud first SaaS platform to do that configuration. And then the Azure Virtual Desktop, product itself is completely managed. So you do your configuration in those different places. So you aren't, I wouldn't say you're looking after it day to day because all of those different services are pulling the levers for you, right? Your configuration is helping you there. So like you say, Alan, definitely worth a walkthrough, a test, a proof of concept, maybe even a pilot to understand, if it would work for you in your scenario. Definitely, because we've had great results with Azure Virtual Desktop. We're big fans of it.
Yeah, and there are organizations out there. We know a couple that um, do like a managed service on it to look after it for you as well if you needed. And because there will be ones, like Citrix, there will be Citrix partners out there that will do that for for their solution. There are some others as well that will help manage that sort of environment for you as well. So it's not, you don't have to worry too much about managing it if you don't want to. So
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a great thing to call out because I know for a lot of organizations, it's all a balance of time, resource, money, risk, and
yeah,
a big matrix of different things. So maybe somebody managing for you would make a lot of sense as well. So yeah, definitely good shout, Alan. Okay, Alan. What's our next episode?
so episode 3 appears to be one that you are going to be looking after or being the SME in. And it looks to be reducing your cost on Azure. So, do you want to give us some info on that?
Do more with less. I'm going to try and distill some of the ways that you can identify your costs on Azure. Because I think Microsoft's tooling on cost analysis is very powerful. Can be a bit overwhelming. It can seem a little bit complicated. So I'll talk to you about understanding your costs, and then I'm thinking of doing a section on some of my top tips for saving money in Azure. The sort of things that are expensive and that can be overlooked and things like that. So yeah. So I'll also do that as part of the episode and try and actually distill some, because we can't talk for an hour about the cost analysis screens in Azure because I think we'll all go to sleep at that point. So I'll try and get us some extra value into that episode as well.
No,
If you've
cool.
enjoyed us, sorry, go on, Alan.
No, I was gonna say no, cool. It sounds yeah, it sounds good.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider subscribing if you'd like to listen to more of this sort of content in the future. We have many more topics that we'd like to cover, and your listens and support is what will continue to fuel the podcast going forward.
We also have the ability for you to give us some feedback. Did you enjoy this episode? Disagree with our thoughts, or is there anything we missed? Please use the form that's in the show notes to leave us some feedback. We'd really love to hear from you.
Thanks very much for your overview of AVD, Alan. It was really, yeah, it was packed full of really useful information, and yeah, it's a really exciting technology. And thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll speak to you on the next episode. See ya.